Hello and welcome to today's A-Team Group webinar on data management for analytics and market surveillance. My name is Sarah Underwood. I'm an editor at A-Team Group and will moderate today's webinar. Our expert speakers today are James Corcoran from KX, Kilia Zovka from Aspect Capital, and Nick Maslovetz from Citadel. I'll introduce them, or ask them to introduce themselves at least, in a few minutes' time. But first, a couple of ways that you can join us in the webinar. To the right of your video screen, you should be able to see a panel with tabs at the top saying questions and polls. We'll be running 3 polls through the webinar. Please do give your answers. We'd love to hear your opinions. And I'll let you know when they're coming up so that you can answer the questions when we're at that section of the webinar. The other tab, the questions tab, you please feel free to ask our experts any questions as we go along, and we'll try and answer as many of them as we can. So the questions tab for your questions, the polls for our polls, your answers. That's great. Also on your screen, you'll see a few A-Team Group resources. You can register today to join an upcoming webinar on how to establish data quality and data governance for analytics. You can also sign up for our Data Management Summit Virtual, which we'll host towards the end of April. And best of all, perhaps you can download our best read publication, the Regulatory Data Handbook. So enough of me, and let me come to our speakers. James, would you like to introduce yourself, please, and tell us a little bit about your role in analytics and surveillance? Okay, thank you very much indeed. Ilya, coming to you.
Hi, Sarah. Thank you for hosting this. So I work within Aspect Capital. We do execution for all of the programs that Aspect Capital trades, and my background is in various roles in banks, but mostly in execution and in EFX market making. So I'll be tackling the questions mostly from a perspective of electronic trading.
Excellent. Thank you very much indeed. And over to you, Nick. Please introduce yourself.
Yes, hi, Sarah. Thank you for having me. Yes, my name is Nick Maslovetz. I'm currently with Citadel, where I'm running global multi-asset, multi-business surveillance development. Previously, I have been with Finra, leading the data science team for market regulation, and previously with New York Stock Exchange in a comparable role.
Excellent. Thank you all very much indeed. And let's move on to our questions. Our first question sets the scene and looks at how difficult data was in 2020. That's good, isn't it? 2020, how difficult everything was. Data management firms having to rethink how they use their data, how they look for opportunity in data. James, coming to you first. How do you see the role of data spreading sort of through 2021, and what will we see?
I think every industry is becoming increasingly digital, increasingly data-driven, and our industry is no different. The capital markets industry is global. We've got global markets, global teams, global infrastructure, and I guess you can't operate a global business or industry without having data at the heart of it. So data, even pre-COVID, was a big theme and a big driver for operating businesses in our industry. I think the transition to a post-COVID world, everyone working remotely, was probably as smooth as one could have hoped with data and infrastructure in place throughout the markets. But if anything, COVID has accelerated the trend of digitization, and we've placed an even greater emphasis on data and data strategy across financial institutions.
Okay, thanks. Nick, what would you add there? How do you see the role of data panning out through 2021?
So I agree with James, and from my point, I would like to highlight that basically since the dawn of time, leaders of the world, would it be leaders of the tribes, clans, armies, countries, they led their firms or countries or whatever by making informed decision. Was it in ancient time or today or in the future? I don't think it will change. But what is not changing? What is not changing in decision making? What is changing is at this time today, it's almost impossible to bring those facts together and give it to your CEO or executive committee for the decision-making process. Why it's not possible? Because those facts, as James highlighted, are hidden today in the petabytes of data. They are not readily available. You cannot see them, you cannot perceive them. You somehow have to mine those. And if you want to be capable of making informed decision today, you better invest in a very sophisticated data mining capability. You should be able to mine this data on scale and rapidly. Otherwise, you behind the curve. Otherwise, you're not ensuring growth of your company. Otherwise, you lose to your competitors. Today, in my opinion, data science is eyes and ears of the modern financial industry and should be treated with all due respect.
Thank you very much indeed. Yes, all that data, we'll come to how to manage it in a little bit. But first, let's run our first poll. This one considers how your organization considers its analytics. So while you vote, let me come to our next question. And let me come to you, Ilya, and bring you in here, please. What goals have FIs got in terms of analytics and market surveillance this year?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I like how we started this answer session in terms of stressing the importance of data. And I will say that from the perspective of trading, what 2020 showed is that we've seen unprecedented market moves. And in such unprecedented moves, human oversight was paramount in running what otherwise are automatic execution algos. Basically, we're thinking about it as algorithms, as self-driving cars. It was really important to have human operators ready to take the wheel and make sure that the autonomous engines don't do anything silly. Now, in order to do so, the traders need to have detailed market information at hand. Platforms like Bloomberg, Refinitiv, they only scratch the surface of what's available in markets. Algos use much more information than what's available on Bloomberg and Refinitiv. You can call up perhaps a broker and ask for a bit of market color, but that's a bit subjective information. So we set the goal at Aspect really to try to what we call democratize microstructure data, making it possible for people who aren't necessarily experts in extracting that information to have that information available to them. But it's not a trivial task. Millions of trades are generated. Extracting information is hard. Storage, querying, visualization, they're just making all of that democratization difficult. But I think it's necessary, and I think it is important to do that, because it's impossible for us to build algorithms that are going to meaningfully react to unprecedented market conditions. And going forward, we really don't know what type of market disturbances we're going to be seeing. And I think that now again, more than ever, it's important to have a timely and detailed information about markets broadly available within an organization, not only for algo trading.
Excellent, thank you. What would you add there, Nick, in terms of goals for this year around analytics and surveillance?
Yes, as Ilya mentioned, when algo is doing something silly, this is definitely fall into category of the market surveillance, or one of the category, compliance in general. But what is frequently overlooked as a role of market surveillance is the protection of the P&L. It's not so obvious, and somebody will say, well, market surveillance is expense category mandatory because of the regulators, but not necessarily, because the moment you enter the market, you are subject to market manipulation by external market participant. And more frequently you trade, and more volume you trade, a bigger target you are. If you browse through the cases brought by SEC, CFTC, Finra, you name it, any regulator in the world, specifically in the space of layering spoofing or entering order without intent to trade, you will see that those are not the big shops, those not are algo. Those are small, manual, semi-manual traders manipulating systematic order flow, manipulating market making activity. And the role of market surveillance, not only to monitor for activity of the firm, is to monitor and to see and inform the traders when their algos, their flow are target to manipulation. We have a lot of experience. We know what cases are brought, and we see those cases, and combination of the knowledge between desk and market surveillance make this task more efficient.
Okay, that's great. Thank you very much indeed. I'm sure we'll see our poll results shortly, but let's run a second poll before we go on with the questions. And this one asks, how difficult is it, and what are your challenges in creating the kind of robust data management system that you need to manage all this data that we're talking about, to be sure your analytics and surveillance are very accurate and appropriately timed and so on. Please vote, and I will come to James to tell us about the importance of a robust data management system, how you can begin to build one, and the difficulties that so many firms have with fragmentation.
Sure. Well, I think you have to, on the one hand, take a pragmatic approach. You've got to, as a data practitioner, you've got to create value and deliver solutions to the business early on. But on the other hand, you've got to take a sort of a long-term or strategic view and make sure that you're putting platforms in place that are scalable, that can take account of or ingest new data sources over time, can scale to more users than you would have envisaged on the platform on day one, and most importantly, probably having discipline around how your applications connect to each other and how they consume information from each other. So I really liked Ilya's concept of democratizing data across the organization. And to do that in a disciplined way, you've got to have well-defined interfaces that can be managed carefully between applications, so that you don't create data silos or bury data inside of applications that can only be accessed by a small number of people. So I think discipline at the outset and designing a scalable platform is really, really key.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Ilya, what would you like to that in terms of building a robust data management discipline that can harness some of this data?
Yeah, I think, going to the basics, it's, you cannot have a good system to extract microstructure information without investing in a data management that's appropriate to the job at hand. And, I guess in particular, I am thinking about time series databases. Data is really the starting point, be it for trading, be it for compliance, be it for surveillance. You have to invest in it. It doesn't come for free. Now, you could have also approaches where people don't invest maybe in a dedicated system, but then try to address some of the questions that need to be answered by pre-computing things in advance and storing intermediate results. I think the pitfall there is that you end up in situations where you just always say, well, if only we had pre-computed this, then we could have answered that question. And it is always like that. If a question requires a significant amount of people's work to be answered, it will remain unanswered most likely. So what you need is a system or a database which allows you to really express the question that you're trying to answer in a very succinct way and focus on that. And basically offload all the computation, all the data management, loading, offload that to the database and trust that the database will do what it needs to do. And you basically don't need to worry about that. Your focus really should be on expressing the question that you're trying to answer, and that be it from compliance, surveillance, or trading perspective.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. We'll come to some case studies later, but let's catch up with the polls, and if we could see the results from the first poll. Thank you very much indeed. The problems of challenges of robust data management, data quality and consistency. Well, I don't think that comes as anything new. Would any of our speakers like to make a quick comment on that?
Well, yeah, it's not surprising, I guess. Data quality consistency remains a challenge in the industry, and it highlights, I guess, the importance of thinking about these things up front. It's really important, I think, to look at your data quality requirements and cleansing on the way into the platform, as opposed to trying to clean the data after it's already ingested. So having a really strong ingest layer and a cleansing and metadata and tagging layer is really key to getting that quality and consistency.
Okay, that's great. We'll come back to issues around data quality and all the other things that go with it in a later question. Can we see the poll for people's opinions on their analytics systems? Okay, we'll catch up with that one in a little while if we can. Here it is. Well, very even. Most people are somewhat satisfied, just about satisfied, and a few are very satisfied. Good for them. That's good to know, but other people have got a bit of catching up to do there. Anybody like to comment on that? Does that look as you might expect?
Slightly better than I expected, to be honest.
That's good to hear.
Yes, hearing from the industry conferences, etc. Yeah, it's quite surprising.
Okay, that's excellent. Thank you very much indeed. And let's go back to our questions, and coming back to you, James. How can firms synchronize all the data? As we've said, a lot of data, some in the cloud, some internal, maybe some is hosted. How can they synchronize that to get sort of meaningful outcomes for analytics and market surveillance?
It's a tricky one. I think it's really important to view the different environments, from on-prem, private cloud to public cloud, as a continuum, as opposed to 2 or 3 very separate environments. You look at it as a continuum of infrastructures or environments that can be specified according to your business and your InfoSec and your security. Then you can create an all-encompassing platform that is spread across the on-prem to all the way through to the hosted environment. You definitely want to be looking at cloud native InfoSec and security tooling, and leveraging best practices when it comes to identity access management. So if you can integrate with tooling that can work in a hybrid environment, then you can have platforms that span this continuum. So I would encourage everyone to think about it as a continuum, as opposed to totally separate environments that can't necessarily talk to each other. And that's key for hybrid cloud environments, which we think will prevail over the next couple of years.
Okay, James, I have a question in from the audience about this sort of issue. How best would you balance data in a cloud, on-premise, and maybe hosted to get the best kind of results for applications such as analytics and surveillance?
I think balance is probably the key word, and it's highly likely that you will have data residing in a combination of on-prem and cloud going forward for at least the next number of years. Having a sort of a connector layer or a gateway layer that can load balance across these 2 environments is the key, and having the ability to almost mask or abstract away the residence of that data, so that the business user, whether that's a quantitative researcher or an analyst or even an application, the burden should not be on the user to know where that data resides. So having an abstracted interface layer that can span that continuum is the key.
Okay, that's great. Thank you very much indeed. And Nick, coming to you on that thorny issue that was raised earlier around data quality. How can people approach these problems? Data quality, consistency, completeness, timeliness, all absolutely essential to meaningful results.
Yes, I think there are two angles to this question. One was strategic question. Not necessarily executive management of the company understand what does it mean. If the surveillance do not get a correct data or required data, I'm talking from trade surveillance perspective, this is not the problem per se, the biggest problem. It's mean if you generalize from this problem and go up, it's mean the business doesn't have sufficient books and records. And to have books and records is a fundamental requirement for any company in financial industry. And it's a job of people who run this data mining, data analytics team, surveillance team, to correctly interpret the problem and what is the actual problem to executive management. And we're supposed to decide it, and this decision should be enforced on enterprise-wide level. Those old infrastructure has to be built on the enterprise-wide level if your executive management correctly understand the problem. It's a books and records. However, you can ask me, well, what in meantime? Should I wait for months and even years, maybe until this enterprise-wide platform is implemented? No, absolutely not. You have to do something meantime, right now. And what James mentioned just previously, building this abstraction layer before you data hit analytics, I think it's the most powerful and the most robust solution, especially when your data mining platform sits across all businesses, across all regions. What you can do is build this mini data refinery when you collect the data, abstract the data, change the sources as needed, put workaround as needed, and keep your analytic absolutely separate, agnostic, and segregated. And when your data hit the analytics, it's clean, or it's relatively clean. Tomorrow, you replaced one bad data source with good data source, throw away those workaround you put in place to mitigate for this data quality, but your analytic layer didn't have a change in a single line of code. Therefore, segregation, mini refinery, it's maybe petabyte size. I call it mini refinery because it's focused on specific industry. For surveillance, I would not refine anything I don't need. I only collect the data I specifically need for the purpose of my analytic. But this two segregation, it's working definitely as a good starting point. A second one, while I'm waiting for this big enterprise data initiative, is a choice of technology. And the choice of technology is really related to ability of this technology to digest as many data sources as possible. Tomorrow, business starts and a new market, and new market is about to go live, and they cannot wait because they will lose this market opportunity. They will lose money, and if they are not coming in tomorrow, they are not coming in. It will be too late. In surveillance, you cannot wait until data is completely passed through enterprise level. You should be able to connect to Kafka. You should be able to connect to various databases. You should be able to connect to the cloud. You should be able to connect to flat files, fixed logs, and everything. Therefore, versatility of the technology you're employing, it's a second factor. Therefore, to summarize it, enterprise initiative is a key long-term solution. However, you can refine your data yourself, and you can choose versatile technology which can deal with multiple data sources.
Okay, Ilya, what would you say here in terms of addressing data quality issues?
Yeah, I think my take on that is slightly of a narrower focus than what Nick was talking about. I am more really kind of talking data quality from a perspective of, well, firstly, just market data, in which case you might need to do some data cleaning, but actually, given that today's markets are digital and the collection is certainly without any errors, it is typically our misunderstanding of certain tags on pieces of data that generate issues. It's more that, I would say that I prefer to keep that market data really as the beginning point of any workflow. And that's where everything starts. And I would argue against intermediate data intermediate data being generated, at least on this, let's say, slightly smaller scale. So I would be doing the split, not necessarily in terms of analytics and data platform. I would rather do that you will have certain pieces of code and functions that start with the raw data that are certainly going to be shared amongst multiple elements of your organization. If we're working in trading or we're working in compliance, we basically need to use the same tools to get your basic trading statistics or some well-accepted market statistics. So it makes perfect sense to reuse those. If someone finds an issue with one of the functions, they will fix it. It should be shared by everyone who uses that. On the other hand, as we get kind of along the way of answering questions that are specific to a domain like trading or compliance, they will be more specific functions. So, I'll kind of start with the raw data, then have some shared functionality or shared functions in between, and then you will have segregation and very specific functions being applied to very specific questions that specific groups will address. So that kind of makes the split between, for me, it's easier to maintain functions than it is that are some of them are shared, some of them are specific, than it is to maintain data sets that are shared, and then some of them will be specific to specific questions. Now, of course, for that you need substantial computing power because you're computing everything from scratch, and we can speak on that a bit later.
Okay, excellent. While we're on this subject, can I come back to you? I think we've kind of touched on it in our conversation, and we have a question that asks, coming back to data quality, how can we prioritize and ensure data quality for analytics and surveillance? Because obviously a lot of people go, this is a lot of data, it's all got to be great, good quality, but that's not the case. How do you prioritize that data? I
think a lot of there's going to be some data cleaning that's, it's obvious to everyone that we need to do. And I think that's not a question. That's just about putting the time and an effort to filter out certain things. Now, I think the job of people who work with data isn't just to say, well, here's an issue with data, and then throw all their feet up in the air and say, well, someone go fix it. Unfortunately, you cannot do that because, usually there isn't anyone who's going to do and fix it for you. And secondly, it is really your job to understand the data you're working with. So I think that, when you have in place a shared code base of functions, that if you know that if you go and fix an issue with a certain piece of data that you're using, that it's going to help yourself, but also it's going to help everyone else who uses it. I think that's a well-spent time. That time is spent to helping yourself, but that it's not just a throwaway thing. It is something that other people will be using. And likewise, you'll be using the effort that other people have put in. So I think the onus is really on the users of the data to actually make sure that the data that they are using is well understood and potentially in a format that they can perhaps use it without 100% understanding of the origins of it.
Okay, that's great. Staying with you and stepping back, what advice would you give people in terms of sourcing and integrating and implementing governance for the data?
I guess at the risk of repeating, I guess my ideal view approach is really, have raw market data as the beginning point of things, and then you have this set of functions that you use to come to answers that are from different domains. And I guess now is a good time to maybe tackle the thing. If you are starting from scratch every time you do an analysis, you are recomputing things. And, perhaps to put it in perspective, one day of microstructure data generates, about 500 years of 15-minute price data. So the amounts of data that we need to be handling and recomputing these things is really large, and the task of running computation on it is not trivial. And that kind of loops back to my initial my point earlier. That is, we need to use specific tools in order to do that. And in the end, my job or the job of of anyone who's trying to extract information is we need to get that information out of the data, but at the same time we want to minimize the amount that we spend in storing the data, in moving it around, and really ultimately the value added that someone working in a trading environment or in compliance is really, okay, let's be ingenuity, let's be smart about what type of information we want to extract. Let's offload that entire thing of how it's done to, I'll say, experts in database design and experts in because it's a highly non-trivial task to actually handle these huge amounts of data that are generated in markets.
Okay, James, coming to you on that one, how would you look at sourcing, integrating, and then of course governance?
Yeah, well, I definitely agree with a lot of what Ilya said there, and I think when it comes to surveillance analysts need to look at market microstructure at the same level of detail as algorithmic traders in the front office. So having this highly granular data set that's available to everyone who needs to access it is really important. Also agree with the need to store it down raw and then have the ability to filter as necessary on the fly. And it's really important to be able to filter data in different ways depending on the use case or depending on what computation or algorithm you're applying to it, or what order book event you're trying to reconstruct. When it comes to integrating data, I think the phrase that I really like here is tightly integrated but loosely coupled. And what I mean by that is we really want to have a tight level of integration for internal and external data sources and feeds, but retain the ability to swap them in and out over time if you want to move to a different data vendor, or if you want to change one data source for another. But you can only do that if you have this decoupled architecture and avoid building sort of vendor specific or data source specific logic deep into the database and the application.
Okay, that's very helpful. Thank you very much indeed. And coming to our final poll question, how would you or how do you plan to develop your data management to improve analytics and market surveillance over the next year? So if you'd like to answer that question, I'm going to come back to James to talk about the kinds of technology solutions that can help you here. And he's going to show us how KX would help him here. But first, do we have any, here we go, KX, lovely. Thank you. James, tell us a little bit about technology solutions to these problems that we've talked about, and there's plenty of them, and a little bit about KX's approach.
Sure. Well, our approach is to very much combine streaming data with massive amounts of data at rest, and to be able to capture multiple different data sources simultaneously, be able to run computations on data as data is in flight. That enables real-time decisioning and real-time insights. But ultimately to be able to capture and manage and store all of this data across, in capital markets, it's across global markets, across multiple asset classes, whilst at the same time giving users that really simple, easy to use interface to come in and query data and run computations like rebuilding the order book and recreating events. So how do you do that at scale and in a real-time environment and in a secure way? Our platform is designed to do exactly that. It combines the real-time with the data at rest and integrates with enterprise environments. So interoperability with visualization tools, with machine learning tools, and security and authentication products. So as we've been talking about, non-trivial to get your data strategy right, but the KX Streaming Analytics platform is designed to give you that horizontal capability across your organization.
Okay, thank you very much indeed for that. Let's see the poll results for that from that last poll, if we may. Great. Perhaps as we might have expected, more reliance on vendor cloud solutions, more reliance on hosted vendor solutions, more reliance on in-house development, and just a little bit more on-premise vendor solutions, and just a little bit more in-house approaches, I think, if I'm reading correctly. James, what do you think to that?
Yeah, it's I guess it is showing the increased relevance and importance of cloud. The cloud is definitely giving us more optionality in terms of deploying platforms, in terms of integrating existing and new data sets. And it's good to see this sort of forward-looking view here across the industry. I'm quite excited about the solutions that we're seeing from cloud vendors and from software vendors who are partnering with the cloud. And I think that ecosystem is set to grow, which should hopefully provide a lot of value to participants across the street.
Excellent, thank you. Nick or Ilya, would you like to add to that? Is that how you would expect things to go next year? Or this year, I should say.
Yes, absolutely. Definitely cloud give you more opportunity, and cloud give you more scalability, etc. and so on. However, it's always give you extra challenge. And what we talked about, what James will talk about, creating this layer which allow you to switch back forth, and you don't really user of the data and does not really see where the data coming from. That would be ideal state. Some cloud providers give you this natively built-in flexibility, which really create a hybrid cloud. You really don't need to build much in-house to ensure there's transparency of the data and data integrity of the data fabric. Unfortunately, other data provider, cloud provider, lock you in, or you basically 100% in, or you 100% out, and the data transfer between on-prem and the cloud is extremely expensive. It's cheaper to get to the cloud. It's almost impossible without breaking the bank to get out of the cloud. Therefore, be wise with your cloud provider. Be really cautious and do think ahead that your data, especially if you're trading firm, do not 100% exist on the cloud. Never.
Okay, that's right. It takes me back to vendor lock-in. Hey, Ilya, would you like to add anything there? Is that the way you see things going?
Yeah, I mean, cloud, it's nice. It sounds great. Unfortunately, for trading, it is usually not what you can do. I mean, we obviously need the data right next to where we use it and where we compute on it. So cloud isn't really what we can do really in trading. I can touch slightly on this aspect of the poll, which is the vendor thing. And while obviously I was arguing that we should be using third-party products and not coding everything from scratch, I think there is a fine line there to be had. And if you take a vendor that has let's say all the analytics, everything pre-canned for you, then really I have to ask the question, well, what's my value add? What can I actually create in terms of data analytics to answer some questions that are relevant to my clients? And so there is a very fine line to walk, where you have this flexibility of expressing relevant questions and relevant, let's say, quant problems, but also being able to offload let's say the data management part onto a database that is designed for that. So I will not completely buy into the vendor thing, but I will buy into, give me flexibility so I can do my thing, but please do the other things that are very difficult and that require a huge amount of development to process this data.
Right. Okay, that's great. Thank you very much indeed, everybody. And let's talk a little bit now about streaming data, increasingly popular. And Nick, let me come back to you. What would you say about the importance of streaming data in terms of analytics and surveillance?
Specifically related to surveillance, first of all, not all type of potential manipulation of behavior can be detected in real time. The big chunk will require date of day or a day, complete day of data, or even multiple days of data to find this pattern and detect it, properly analyze it. However, there is a smaller subset of super important reports you can run in real time. And the difference there between capability of do it or not is very simple. If you can do it close to real time on real or near real time, you most likely will not get regulatory action against you, or it will be very slight. It may be cautionary letter. If you detected a potentially manipulative or suspicious activity in real time and stopped it in real time, the regulator will act accordingly. If you let it last for minutes, hours, days, the action will be proportionate. Regulator will get detected, they will find it, they're sophisticated today, and longer the activity lasts, the more severe punishment you should expect. And if you never detected it, including lack of supervision and all this nice stuff. And the second is a P&L. If you detect that the algo is getting manipulated by external market participant and you stop it right away, you prevent P&L loss. If you let it last, simply losing money. And therefore, there are two ramifications, regulatory ramification and P&L implications.
Okay, that's great. James, coming to you, and perhaps on a more positive note, if I can help you rather than get you into trouble, where can data streaming help here?
Sure. Well, I definitely agree with Nick, what he's saying there. I think the importance of streaming in real time comes not in analyzing the data, not solely in analyzing the data that's on the wire or being created just now or in the last number of milliseconds, but in looking at that data with the context of the history. And so being able to take trends that you've identified over the course of running large analytics and computations against historical data, and embedding some of those data points or information into a real-time stream where you're computing new derived data on the fly. I think that's where the exciting part of real-time technology comes in. I would also say as well, if you're looking at things purely from a batch perspective, in technology, batch processing tends to get slower over time because data volumes grow and the batch gets slower and slower. If you have a real-time platform in place, I think not only is it inherently more scalable from day one, but that's the type of platform that allows you to embed your own algorithms and analytics, like Ilya was saying earlier on, which is a really, really important point. So I think you use software vendors for your infrastructure and your platforms, so that you can have the flexibility to build your own models and analytics into the platform and into your data pipelines.
Thank you. Ilya, what's your view on data streaming? Where is it useful?
Yeah, real-time data, of course, you cannot trade algorithms without real-time data, but
Sure.
let's, taking it from a slightly, more of a, let's say, surveillance or algo surveillance point of view, it's more, real-time data is more important in unexpected circumstances than it is in business as usual situations, at least from algo performance perspective. And, 2020 certainly has shown us a fair amount of unexpected circumstances. So, having real-time data, having information in front of people to be able to react. And I'm not only thinking about, a big red button, really, but I'm thinking about humans as having the information required to be able to judge, what type of market regimes are we trading in? The algos are autonomous, but, they may be designed for completely different market regime than we are currently finding ourselves in. Going to this cars analogy, right? If you're driving you find yourself with a sports car on a dirt road in the mountains, you're not going to be doing very well. So you should be able to detect real time what type of circumstances you are in, so that you can apply the best decision and or apply the best algorithm excuse me, for that circumstance. And to this end, I think that we aren't in a world where we have computers trading. I think the best really of both worlds will be human plus machine operating in markets at the same time, and machines and algos will have information streaming. Obviously they need to be, but I think also humans have to have information that is relevant for them to make decisions of what's an appropriate algorithm for a certain market regime. If you just run a single algorithm that may have been optimized over last 3 years or last 1 year, you're going to get average performance of that algorithm. It's not going to be good in no particular market regime is it going to be good. It's just going to be average, and I think we can do better than that.
Okay, that's great. James, I have an audience question here about streaming. If you can take it, let me put it to you. It says, at the moment, we don't use streaming data, but we would very much like to. How can we take steps to add and integrate streaming data to our analytics and surveillance solutions? So how to introduce streaming data?
Sure. Well, I guess there's two parts to it. There's onboarding a real-time data feed. So sourcing data, whether that's an internal data feed or an external market data feed, for example, you've got to source a real-time feed or a pipe, and then you've got to have technology and infrastructure capable of ingesting that data and managing it. When it comes to that technology choice, you want to have a software that'll not only deal with that streaming data, but be able to make it available in real time for querying, and to be able to persist it so that you can go back and analyze it over time or replay the data. So it's not purely about the streaming technology, it's about that end-to-end pipeline, but sourcing the right real-time data feed and partnering with the right data source is important, and then having a tight level of integration with your streaming technology is key. I would stress the importance for managing your interfaces across the data ingest into the streaming, and then how users interact with it. The last thing you want to do is create a bottleneck where you've got multiple users all connecting to one single point, and then having single points of failure or resilience issues. So thinking about your high availability strategy as you're implementing streaming is really important as well.
Thanks very much indeed for that. Good stuff. Thank you. And coming to you, Nick, I think wrapping up some of these things we've talked about, can you sort of talk us through a short case study of how this could all be done to achieve better analytics or surveillance?
Yes, there are quite a few interesting case studies, but my favorite, I think, would be a recent example of Finra CAT implementation here in US. As probably most of us on the call know, SEC prescribed creation of this consolidated audit trail, which combined data for equity options from across market, broker-dealer and exchanges, combined it together in a single giant database, I would say, and the process was definitely difficult. First, one provider was chosen after the SCAT provider was chosen, but now it's successful, which answer the biggest question, I think: can it be done? Yes, it can be done. And therefore, if the enterprise says like, oh, I cannot do it because it's simply too complex. Well, Finra did it across multiple enterprises. It's really done. But what is make it, in my opinion, my personal opinion, what made Finra very successful? And it's really lies in very simple principle. And what Ilya was saying, understand your data. Finra led by business experts who were able to transition business knowledge into correct technical implementation in technology. Most of the time, you see failures in comparable project on an enterprise level, etc., just because technology move a little bit too far. They're implementing maybe marvelous, beautiful technological solution, but it's not usable. You should not go ahead of your business. You should not be, tail should not be wagging the dog in this case. Move with what your business need. Don't try to create something beautiful technologically if it's not needed. Simple, but not always followed principle. Second principle, choose the very difficult task. Choose very tested and very time-proven technology. When Finra CAT went to the cloud, it was not their first attempt. Finra was in the cloud for quite a few years before. Therefore, they had experience, they had expertise, they had technology, and they had, most importantly, those experts in-house who were building and not resolving those issues they just came across. No, they were completely ready. And the last one, I think, use as less technology as possible. We technologists very tempted sometimes to create this alphabet soup, or I create this technology for this and this and this and this. But all this technology requires experts. They have a different issue. Handshake should be created. Therefore, from my perspective, business should drive. Technology should be versatile, as simple as possible. And you have to be time proven in this technology.
Okay, thank you, James. I think you have a case study for us too.
Sure, yeah. So one of our customers, recent implementation, I really like this case study. It sort of goes back to what Nick was saying earlier about surveillance not purely being a compliance function. You know, that there's P&L upside if you get surveillance right, protection and upside. So one of our customers very much adopted that mindset in a recent implementation. And initially, the surveillance application they had to implement was for a particular asset class and for a particular region. So relatively narrow in scope, but they always knew that they wanted to scale that out. And so they thought really hard, not just about the application design, but also the data platform, and they sort of decoupled those two things at the outset. And that made it really easy to add additional asset classes over time, and then scale it from a regional instance to a global instance. And in the end, the data platform that they put in place became the strategic data platform for market data across the organization. And then the original use case, surveillance, became one of many different applications that sat on top of that platform. So it's really one of my favorite use cases, or case studies, I should say, from the last few years. And kind of really highlights the sort of the data strategy part of what we've been talking about today.
That's excellent. Thank you. Always good when you see one thing being used, obviously, and with great success. Thank you both very much for that. And now we come to our final item on the agenda, and that's for me to ask our experts what advice they would give to practitioners developing data management to enhance analytics and surveillance over the coming months. So Ilya, can I come to you first with this one?
Yeah, absolutely. Conscious of time, I'll try to be very quick.
That's okay.
Extracting information from market data, highly non-trivial. It must be appreciated. Actually, I guess you probably have to try doing it to appreciate the difficulty. And having said that, as a quant, I don't really want to be doing that difficult lift of actually doing the processing and doing the storing. I want to be focusing on the relevant questions that I can actually add value, and that is maybe talking about, how does the market and participants in the market react to certain type of algorithms that we release to the market? What are the likelihoods of, let's say, a large buy order being currently worked on the market? Those type of questions are what I should be doing. And very happy to offload the difficult problem of actually computing that and storing the data required for that computation onto a specific vendor product. And ultimately that is really what at Aspect, our value add really for clients is providing successful strategies and then trading them efficiently. It is not to develop databases. So partnering in these specific areas, I think it is a very, very good way for certain types of firms.
Okay, thanks, Nick. Some ideas from you, some guidance on how data practitioners can improve these things.
Yeah, to be very short, first of all, think ahead at least 1 to 5 years. If today you ask to create a batch T plus a data platform, and if you're successful, there is a very good probability that tomorrow you will be asked to create real-time analytics. Think ahead, think 5-10 years plan. Second, create a data map, data gravity map, where your data, where this gravity points exist on the premises, on the cloud, in the file, in the databases, and position your data mining platform as close to the data as possible, if it's feasible. For example, if 80% of the data exists on the premises, and that will continue to be the plan for the enterprise, don't probably put your platform on the cloud, because you will get to 80% data there, right? And the last point, and I'm just repeating myself, try not to create an alphabet soup of technology. Try to stick this most versatile technology available for you, because it will save time, you will save budget, you will save yourself a major pain and make your stakeholders happy eventually.
Okay, thank you. James, some final comments from you.
Well, great points from the guys. I'd suppose my 3 takeaways would be to stop thinking in terms of overnight batch processing and adopt a real-time mindset. The second would be to include cloud in your thinking and in your plans, particularly over the sort of 2 to 3 year horizon. It's not something you want to be sweeping under the carpet and revisiting in 3 years. So I would very much include the cloud in your plans, even if you're not planning on implementing anything in the cloud over the next a couple of quarters. And the final piece would be to always build with scalability in mind. Try to anticipate your future business requirements and your future data requirements to support the business. And if you have scalability at the heart of the design, you can't go too far wrong.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you, and thank you to all our speakers for sharing their expertise and experience with us today. And thank you to KX for sponsoring today's webinar. Just a quick reminder before we wrap up that today you can register for a few A-Team Group events and resources. First, the webinar, how to establish data quality and data governance for analytics. Also, our next Data Management Summit virtual. You can register today for that, and you can download our regulatory data handbook. That's it for today. So thank you again to James, Ilya, and Nick, and thank you to all of you who have joined the webinar. Please don't forget to fill in your feedback forms. That would be great. Thank you. So thanks again, and goodbye.
Thank you.